All right, I'm excited to be here today with my new friend, Aaron Bethune. Aaron has climbed the Andes at age 19. He saved a life, and he transformed that pivotal moment into a global career in leadership, storytelling, and purpose-driven transformation. He's an author, speaker, and innovator who bridges music, culture, and strategy to inspire impact across different industries, from corporations to charities. He's the creator of the music and culture ambassador role for Mississippi, and he has a legacy of guiding leaders, entrepreneurs, and artists to clarity, purpose, and success. So, not a whole lot of people I think that we've had on the podcast who are better fit for a conversation around finding your purpose and making an impact and sharing your story as an artist. So, Aaron, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast today.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate being here.
Absolutely. So, I'm sure you get this question a lot when you're hopping on things like this, but as someone who helps other people kind of find their purpose and their story, I'm curious to hear a little bit about yourself and your purpose and your story and kind of how you found yourself in this role of helping people express themselves.
Yeah, I think, my story is quite similar to a lot of people who have pursued a career in the music industry, and that I first and foremost wanted to have a music career. And I started piano when I was 4, guitar when I was 7, and, it became my life. I would, like many people, I'd put in many, many hours a day of practice. And it was funny because piano, I stopped before picking up the guitar, and it was partly because I was told to practice so often. My grandfather played piano for 80 years and was my teacher. Wow. And I was, done with that. I wasn't going to practice. What's that all about? And then when I picked up the guitar, it went from, hey, Aaron, you got to practice, to, Aaron, maybe you could, put that down for a little bit. And I just loved it. And I had a friend who started giving me records every birthday that really inspired me, with different guitarists and songwriters. And I, had that as a steady aspect to my life. It sort of defined me on some levels, I suppose. And I found a secondary passion, which was mountaineering and everything outdoor activity wise, climbing, spelunking, caving, going down canyons, down to waterfalls, rafting, whitewater kayaking. I was a guide. With a number of those activities, and guiding people in the mountains, guiding people in the rivers. And so for a period of time, I called myself a musical mountaineer because I felt it sort of defined an Eminem. And it sort of defined my two passions. And I actually went to, I was living in Spain at the time. And as much as I am fluent in Spanish, I was having a bit of a hard time with graduating high school. And so long story short, is I ended up, finishing high school in Canada, and I was going to go into recreation administration to basically get some skills, I guess, in building a business in outdoor activities. And at that point, I learned they had a jazz music program, which I ended up getting into and taking a degree in jazz performance, of which was probably one of the only types of music genres that I had no background in. So, questioned myself quite frequently why I was there, just being that I didn't have some of the background of even high school jazz band that some people did. And in between finishing high school and going back to university, I ended up climbing a mountain. I returned a week 19. I won't go into too much depth, but it started with, I was going to go with somebody that I'd met doing some guiding in the mountains in Spain, who essentially said, "Oh, you could definitely do this." And they said, he was like, we'll go together. And then they sort of backed out of it, and I ended up going by myself with some other European climbers. But it was it was an incredible experience because it was one of the 7 summits. In fact, the highest outside of Asia, so the second of the 7 summits. And there was a lot of training for that. I mean, the thing that was sort of, I didn't find out till right at the sort of most important moment, which is when you're inside of the summit, and that's your moment to summit. I realized that I had only trained to get to the top and had not trained to get back down again. And it really hit me in the sense that I was like, I hadn't put a single second of training in to get back down. And as most mountaineers will tell you, getting to the top is only halfway. And the night before going for the summit, an American climber had gone missing, and I was sort of battling a little bit with the idea of stepping over their body because I'd left at like 1 a.m. and it was now 10 p.m. at night, and the chances of them being alive was pretty slim. And I ended up turning around 200 meters from the summit, which, sounds funny to say, but at the same time, turning around put me on the path to finding Mike, who is this American climber. And I ended up saving his life, which was an impactful story for me, and I would say probably impactful for him. And it really sort of gave me the understanding that life is fragile, life is precious, and we have an experience that we get to have being here, and we do have some say in what we do, and that's tied to our actions. And so that was an experience that I had that was definitely defining on many levels. I realized that, when you're down at sea level, you might have, some goals around materialistic things, and you'll be happy when you got the sports car and the big house and whatever. But when you can't breathe, you're pretty happy with just oxygen, staying warm and that kind of thing, and just basic aspects. And the thing that was interesting too is when you're climbing that height, there's no helicopter coming to save you, so you're very much on a solo journey, in the sense that even if you've got people around you, it's kind of every man for themselves on some level. I mean, even if you're in an expedition, obviously, the goal is for everyone to make it up and down again, but there's always other people in the mountain, and what you learn is that it's very, very much a mindset. Like the physical aspect is one piece, but you really have to have a mindset, and part of that mindset for me was 10 steps, take a break, try and breathe, 10 steps, take a breath, try and breathe. And those, one step at a time has become a big analogy for me in everything in life. You have to see the summit. You have to see where you're trying to go, and you have to see what you're trying to accomplish. That's part of having a really strong vision, whether it's whatever you're doing. But you can't get overwhelmed by just staring at the top. If you're, especially when you climb big mountains, it's, like it can take days, weeks, months to get to the base, let alone climb the thing. And, quite often you're climbing up and then you're going down again, you're portering, you're going back down again. And so if you just get stuck on looking at the summit the entire time, you may find yourself so tired before you even take the first step, you don't take it. And so I think that, you need to be able to recognize, once you've got that vision, understood where you're going, and you've charted a basic path forward, that the very next step is the most important one, and that just keeps compounding. So, I had that experience, and obviously going into music was because it was still very much my ongoing passion. And it started as it was a diploma, which turned into a degree, but it was a 2-year diploma. Then it was a degree. And so I kept sort of telling myself, I really don't want to finish this and just go work at a bank or something. I want to make sure this is going to be what I do for my career. And so at first it was pursuing my own music career and learning how the music industry worked, and just becoming that guy in the band that does everything. And eventually other people started to ask me if I could help them, and finding I really love doing that and getting involved in other people's careers. And there was a defining moment. I remember I was in northern Spain. It was the summertime. I had gone home for a visit, and an old friend of the family had said, "Aaron, I know you really like this artist. I'm bringing them." They were the city coordinator of events, and they said, "I'm bringing them into town. You should come out and see them perform, and I'm sure I can introduce you to them." And at that moment in time, it was one of the records that this friend had given me on one of my birthdays. And so I go to the show. My friend says, I don't think I'm going to be able to introduce you because the guy's a bit of an asshole. Wants to get paid before he plays. It's raining, and they're concerned he wasn't going to play. I mean, in retrospect, I'm like, yeah, you get paid first. Let's take that piece off the table. You don't want to be thinking about the money while you're playing. So I thought, well, I'm here anyways. I'm going to meet this guy. So I lined up like all the other fans at the back of the stage. And, it's kind of coincidental. It was the location. It was the particular night. It was, there was a few factors that were enabling me to be at the right place at the right time, I guess. So I'm lined up with all the other fans, and I'm like, I'm not a fan. That's, it's been sometimes detrimental to me to not have that fan mentality, but I'm waiting my turn, and it's coming up, and I'm telling myself, okay, I don't want to be this fan, so I want to make a connection. And I remember it's my turn, and I extend my hand and I tell him, hey, I'm Aaron. I'm a promoter from Canada. And I hear myself say that. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like a promoter from Canada, which again, I'd been getting into things, right? But I was far from a Canadian promoter. And at that moment, he gives me all of his attention, and he's like, I've been looking for a promoter in Canada I can trust. And I'm like, okay. And this was a guy that had more combined sales of a blues album than B.B. King and Stevie Ray Vaughan, and in Europe, and written songs for Santana, performed songs for Prince, and all this kind of thing. And he says, you got a phone? I'm like, yeah. He says, what's your number? He calls me and he says, you got my number, call me on Monday. And I'm like, I remember it was a Friday evening, and by Monday I'm just like, this guy's not gonna remember me. If I call him up, he's like, Aaron, I've been waiting for your call. And from that moment, it was like I made this commitment. I said out loud, I'm a promoter from Canada. I then committed. And, the next thing you know, it's a year later, and I've got the band on tour in Canada. Not only that, but he had a single out in Europe, and he was very much like Santana, that he had a lot of guest performers, and he had a particular singer on that single that was charting in Europe. And I was like, will this guy be the singer? And this guy was a bit of a rock and roll royalty of sorts himself. And he said, I don't know, why didn't you give him a call? And he gave me his cell phone number as well. And so I call him up, and I'm like, hey, putting on this tour, would you do this? And he says, well, I'm really kind of focused on my own project right now, but if you'd be willing to book us as well, then we could absolutely do some sort of on stage thing where we collaborate and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay. So all of a sudden I had these headlining acts for these festivals in Canada. And that sort of became, I guess you could say, the launching of my Canadian promoter. And I ended up, I was in university at the time, and I actually booked Sly and the Family Stone's first tour of Japan for my dingy apartment, and I made no money. Sly made a whack of money, and I made no money because I didn't know how to make it. And I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't make the money because I didn't know how, although I learned a lot. And so it sort of just went from there. And I'm a really curious guy. I mean, that probably fuels a lot of just my interest in general, is curiosity. Like, how did this work? And there's got to be more to this than that. And I realized that live touring is key and crucial to any artist's success. I think one of the things that has not changed in music is the value of music, which is the experience that music provides. The packaging changes, but not the value. And so live music is the ultimate, I would say, for sure. But I was also very aware that there was more to it. And so for me, it was a matter of, okay, well, what else is there? And the music industry, as I experienced it, was very sort of not secretive, but, people weren't going to give you their sort of insights. Like, it's hard enough to pursue a career. And a lot of people, I think, are protective of that information. And so I was trying to figure it out as I went along. So I essentially, long story short, is I got involved in every aspect of the music business, and from, placing music on TV and film, licensing, publishing, getting artist record deals, artist development. I was involved in every aspect, management. I managed that artist that I took on tour to Canada. So, there I am at 14 listening to their record. And then at for being 23, I was their manager, which was interesting. And then I ended up writing a book because I had all this information. I'd even been teaching courses and this kind of thing, speaking. And so, well, this information is better in someone else's hands than just mine alone. And people would continue to ask how they, I might be able to impact them. And so I felt, if it were books, probably a process in doing that. But in my curiosity, I realized that the music industry really is this sort of small bubble. And it was interesting back in the MySpace, just sort of looking at all the connections and coming to realize that how many starving musicians were the fans of other starving musicians, and sort of the strangeness of it. You're all wanting to have this career in music, but yet it's starving musicians trying to support starving musicians, or better said, starving musicians hoping that the fans would support them. And that made me realize that there's so much more to find a career in music than just focusing on the industry itself alone. And and I would say through all of this, tools emerging that have made the ability for creators to literally create their own careers without the help of record labels. But at the same time, I was very interested in how music impacted people and how that impact spread far and wide. Every culture on the planet has some musical component to it. And, a lot of people would say that it came before language. And I would say that language, if we look at AI, we have this English language that we're speaking right now, and there's this much. This is what we know of, and this is what we use of it, and it's this that we're using to try and express our experiences. AI, on the other hand, has access to everything, and so with words, it can become, you can think it's very profound, but it has a massive vocabulary to express nothing it can experience. And I think, when you look at music and the arts, there's a very strong capability of expressing what cannot be expressed in words. So anyways, all to say, music has been something that's been very fascinating for me. And so I was like, okay, there's got to be more to this. And I started taking that understanding of the importance of building an audience and how it's not just about singles, about representing people. And that's branding. And, ultimately musicians are generally further ahead in the branding field than, anyone in branding business per se, because that's what you're doing. You're bringing people together that feel that you're representing them. It's not just the single, it's just everything about what you're creating. And so I started to see how I could maybe bring some of those approaches outside of the music industry. And so I ended up, working with government organizations, worked with the FIS World Ski Championships and Spotify and all the athletes around the world around music and its impact on their training. And that was a fascinating thing, just to see what getting people in the, the flow and the zone in, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, or Western North America. Like it was quite interesting to see where people's interests were at. But at the same time, I got involved with helping the Gwich'in First Nation and indigenous in Alaska and the Yukon to in a strategy around stopping Trump from drilling oil and selling oil leases in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which I'm sure he's going to open that back up again now. The Music and Culture Ambassador role for the state of Mississippi, which didn't exist prior to that, and I don't believe any other state has such a thing, and that became quite intriguing in how we could utilize music and culture as a way to spread America's, in this case, Mississippi's brand of Birthplace America's music far and wide, which got me involved in the Grammys. I just fascinated by all the moving parts, pursuing, understanding all of them, how it impacts people, and ultimately, from the seeking and pursuing purpose and meaning and fulfilling essentially, your highest self has in some ways been a constant for me. And that, if you just simply look at someone's career in music, if you're here and you want to be here, that's not just an external change. It starts with an internal change first. And I recognized that I was doing that for all of my clients, and it's probably the work I enjoyed the most. And I'll just make a quick jump to today, in which, beyond music related things that I'm still, involved in and people I'm working with, now I help people to uncover who they are through their stories and find and align their intentions with their actions through writing books and developing tools also in the field of AI and events and those kind of things. And, when I'm not doing that, I'm usually locked in the lotus position, meditating, and, uncovering for myself who I believe I am. Hopefully that answers your first question. That was long-winded, I know.
Amazing. Yeah, that's quite the journey that you've been on, and a lot to unpack there. I love that analogy of you being a mountaineer, and also working with a different kind of journey. They're very practical. Like this is a mountain going from like here to there. It's 10, look at the next 10 steps. It's always one step at a time, but you got to keep focus on the summit that you're kind of aiming for. And, I'm curious, having both, focused on personal development for yourself and exploring your own identity and your own journey, and now having taken that work and helped others to kind of express themselves and kind of discover who they are and share their stories and write books about it. What have you found to be the thing more than anything else that gets in the way of someone fully expressing themselves, or someone kind of like going on that journey? Like, what's the biggest obstacle?
It's amazing, man. Like I mean, there's so much to this, but part of that is the limiting beliefs that we hold. And I think that, I could definitely go off the deep end and probably lose some of the audience and definitely stop me if you think that's the case. But, if you want to go really deep, I mean, who are we? And I would say we are the observer of the experience that we perceive as being ourselves. And that observer is who sees the movie of our lives. And when we're in the movie of our lives, we're constantly reacting to it and we're interacting, and it's full of emotions and feelings and experiences and outcomes and all sorts of things. And yet the observer of all of that doesn't have those emotions and feelings. And I think when you step into that observer role, you recognize you provide space between the two. You start to realize that you really are reacting to endless thoughts. And, some of them serve you, some of them don't. There's a consequence to them. But in essence, those thoughts are the meanings that we're projecting into things. I think, essentially things are empty of meaning until you project something into them. And so if your movie is, I was born on this day and, this is who I perceive myself as being. I was, in my case, I was born in Montreal, Canada in 1980. And at 4, I moved to England on a ship, blah, blah, blah. You build this narrative of who you are and you associate with. And you see this, like, for example, I'll try not to go on too many tangents, but like if you're a musician and you think that the keys to the kingdom are held by X record label, but oh my gosh, like I could never meet with them. And if I did meet with them, what would you even say? Like, you're cool with your friends and it's fun with your friends, but then you're in the executive's office and you're like, am I worthy? These are thoughts that you're projecting and believing to be real. And at the end of the day, it's a narrative that you're creating and living by. And I think that narrative is constantly evolving. And, those experiences, you learn from them. A failure teaches you something, I think, greater than a success for the most part. And so you evolve and you develop and you change. And, one day you're happy to get paid in beers. And then you're, it's like, no, I need at least $100. But from $100 to $1 million for a show, there's a long way to go. But really, like, what is the difference? Like, is that person's music worth $1 million? And I know, we can break down, which I think is actually very difficult. What is the value of music? But, you could sort of break down, well, this is why this, when this group or act or artist performed is worth $1 million. This is why yours is only worth this. Really, there's no difference. It's just, there's a perception. It's like in the corporate world of climbing the corporate ladder. Oh, well, you can't do that until you've done this. Can't it really? Is that really the case? Or is that just what you told yourself and being told? And so I think that when you believe yourself to be the movie, it's like, you're like a fart in the windstorm, you're being blown all over the place. But if you recognize that you're actually the observer, you start to be able to take more, I think, you're able to take more steps that are intentional. And, you start to recognize that some of these thoughts don't serve you. Some of these, knee-jerk reactions don't serve you. These limiting beliefs don't serve you. And when you start to question everything, and the question, why not me? You start to uncover the truth. And the fact is that so to answer your question, what is the biggest challenge? It's yourself, because you're the same individual that's going to make $1 million that used to make $100. And in fact, it's like, at the end of the day, if you have $100 in your bank account today, and now you get a transfer of $1 million to your bank account, did you change? Should you have changed? Like, is it a good idea to go, yeah, I changed, and it was because of the $1 million? No, you didn't change. Your bank account changed, and guess what? It could change again. But at the end of the day, what really has to be, valuing itself is what you're perceiving to be your value before you look at your bank account. And, I think that's one of the things I see in the music industry, which is, when you look at a lot of investors in people's careers early on in music, are basically investing for access. They want to have access to the cool lifestyle, to the cool, aspects of that music can bring, but that's not how they made their money. And where they made their money, the value of their time, the value of what they could bring, the value of what they do isn't likely being valued at $100 or we'll do it for beer or exposure. And yet within the music industry, for people, especially starting out, it's like, you have the money, you have everything. Like, what can I do to get the money that's going to make my career, flourish? And part of that is going, okay, well, sure, money's part of it, but you bring a lot more than just the money. In fact, who's holding the money? Because, if I hold $100 and you hold $100 and the other person, the money's the same, but it's also who's attached to that money can make even greater impact, which would actually then suggest that it's not money that you need. It's what, money buys, or what money can bring, or what those pieces are that would, you think the money's going to do to your career to make it work. But again, you're not seeing your own value in the equation. And so you put all you put all your eggs in their basket, and you're not seeing your value. And so I think that when you look in the rearview mirror, you can see this golden thread of life that's so perfect in the past. Oh yeah, if that crappy thing didn't happen, I wouldn't have been in this great position. And I think that the key is to find that magic in the current moment. But when you look at that, if you are the artist making the $1 million and looking at when you made $100, you'll recognize that just as we experience time pass and we don't really think internally that we're any older than when we were at 19 climbing the Andes, but our physical bodies have changed. It's kind of the same thing. Like, did you really change, or did you just perceive that your value was greater than $100? And so I think third time yourself. That's the biggest thing that gets in the way.
Super interesting. Yeah, we're certainly taking a philosophical deep dive here. I think it's very, very interesting. It sounds like what you're saying is that really the biggest thing that kind of comes in the way is generally yourself, or maybe more accurately, like your idea of yourself, or your identification with something that isn't truly who you are, but is more of like a story or a narrative, and that identity, that's those limiting beliefs, who you think you are, it kind of come up and they get in the way of the truth, which is that you are an observer. You're more like limitless than you might perceive, and therefore, what you can accomplish is actually more open. It's more open than you might generally think, and that's sort of the biggest thing that gets in the way is the blocks that come up because of the identity that you've kind of built, and you think that you're limited by things that you're not.
Yeah, man. How many people listening to this have heard this someone tell them, you should really get a real job. Music's a great hobby. Well, if that's the environment that you've, been growing up in, if that's what's surrounding, it's like that, the 5 people is a representation of who you are, which put otherwise is surround yourself with the 5 people that you want to be. It's like telling you right out of the gate, you'll never make money at this. It'll never be a career, but it's a great hobby. And so you're right there. You're right out of the gate. You're like, okay, this isn't like, how do I shift my perspective when it's worth something? I think that that's definitely part of it. And I think that if you look at careers that stand out throughout time, even, way beyond us even being on this planet, as far as, you and I, we hear about certain artists. obviously there was many people that played the piano and wrote music at the time of Mozart, but we hear about Mozart. And I think that if you look at, pick your era of music, the people that stand out were unique. They embraced their uniqueness. I mean, it was like, Axl Rose. I mean, some people might say, is that a great voice? I don't know. Or, Elvis, like, didn't seem that special at the time. I mean, now the way he would dance and whatever, but at the time, it was breaking some rules. And I think that the moment you are trying to fit in, you're not standing out. And the moment you're trying to emulate someone else's success, you're giving up your own. And I think that, the fact of the matter is that you have to have some level of confidence to really embody your own beliefs of the music you want to create and what you want to be known for. And that takes a certain type of person, like not to conform, not to necessarily, fit in when sometimes that might serve them, temporarily. And, it's a tough one. Like, it's like music licensing. On the one hand, if they want to license a track that sounds like X artist and you sound like them, great, but that's also going to pay less than if what they're looking for, you are the only person that have it, and that's your sound. Then it's there isn't a backup, right? And I think that the person whose music sounds like something else is probably going to license more songs, but the person that's sounding like themselves alone are going to get less licenses, but have the potential of earning more because of it. And I think that, so that's part of it is to confidently be yourself and recognize that there's already a name your artist, but there's only one you. So I think that's definitely a part of it. And we're in this amazing time where we've got tools where we don't really have to conform. I mean, we may fail, but it's always good to fail doing something that you believe in rather than regretting that you didn't try.
Oh, so good. It reminds me a little bit of the Steve Jobs speech that he gave around like the square pegs and the round holes and think different, and it sounds like what you're saying is that, there's a tendency to want to fit in and belong. And because of that, we tend to shy away from those things that really make us unique, the sharp edges, the things that make us feel weird, the things that kind of create tension. And in the short term, we might shy away from those, and it helps us fit in. But those very things are the things that are going to help you stand out and kind of cut through the noise. And so really, we should be embracing, those parts of ourselves that are quirks or weird things that make us unique. And I'm curious, what would your advice be for, if an artist is listening to this or watching this right now, and they're kind of lacking perspective because they live in their own movie, and they're kind of struggling to figure out like what is it that makes me unique? I'm not unique. I've always been this way, and there's nothing special about me. What's your advice for them to kind of tap into that core that is unique?
I think there's a lot of value in looking at the people that are around you. I mean, are you surrounded by people doing the things you want? It doesn't have to be in music. It's, maybe it's just looking through the lens of pursuing a passion or believing in themselves, like having that sort of representation. I think that social media and it seemed to kind of feel like it was tied a little bit to the extras on the DVDs, where suddenly you went from, you got the live concert, but now you're equally as interested in all the sort of behind the scenes stuff, which, now that's kind of a main component of artists' social media, is to share their lives. And I think I'm not a huge fan of social media in the sense of what people perceive about other people's lives. Like, you're seeing a slice of someone's life. It's the 1% of the day. It's not the 99%. That can be detrimental. I would, absolutely would say that can be very, very detrimental to both the viewer and to the individual. Like, I mean, if you look at your own life on social media, you're like, I wish my life was that good. You're not too happy either. So I think that being said, having some context, having some, feedback loop, especially by being around people that you admire, that you respect, that you look up to, finding mentors, people that have done the things that you want to do. Like, I'm a dad, and I'll tell my son, You're getting my best advice. 44 years in the fight. This is my best advice. And of course I can put myself in his head and go, oh my gosh, I'm that dad. But it's kind of true. I mean, whatever advice you have today is your absolute best advice, which is why we look into the past and, oh, I should have done that, was because now you have that knowledge that you didn't have then. And so finding mentors is a really big one. I think the other aspect of it is it's tough because you're putting yourself on a stage under a spotlight for the world to see, and you're in a very vulnerable place. And that's something that is challenging for anyone to do that, and to put yourself in a place that perhaps you feel no one else is doing, and that's going to put you even further into the realms of judgment, can be even harder. And I think that, if I go back to the climbing analogy, in altitude, one of the techniques is to what they call climb high, sleep low, which means you climb higher than you sleep, because then you push your body to certain limits, from the oxygen standpoint and pressure, to then reducing your height so that your body is able to more easily sleep, as opposed to going as high as you can and then sleeping at this, really uncomfortable place and then doing the same thing the next day. I think there's a lot of value in putting yourself out of your comfort zone, but not doing it so much that you decide you're never going to do it again. So, I mean, this is kind of unrelated, but not really. Like I love, this whole sort of cold exposure thing that's become quite popular. Mm-hmm. And I honestly think that a cold shower, and if you're near the ocean, winter, whatever, but just even a cold shower, that is a great way to experience getting outside of your comfort zone and finding that you can do that thing, and seeing what happens when you do it on a regular basis and you become resistant to that, and it's no longer a big deal and you can go for longer. I think it's really important to find those things within your, what you do and your career and as a musician, to have, wins, but also the opportunity to fail, but not in such a big way that you're, not going to be able to do it again.
Good stuff. Yeah, so it sounds like what you're saying is that you want to intentionally find things that push your comfort zone, not so much that you snap, but enough that kind of stretch the edge of what you think is possible for yourself. Side note, cold therapy and cold plunge. Yeah, for about 7 months in the morning, I was doing the Wim Hof method, the cold plunge, and I can attest to, it was really challenging at the beginning, but you're right. Like you start to build up a resistance to it. And, I have 3 kids at home under the age of 7, and it's like a germ fest, as you can imagine. And for the 7 months that I was doing it, I got sick like once. And it was when I was taking a break, like it was like a week-long break because I traveled and I was gone. So yeah, there's definitely something happening there. I need to get back into it. I'm slacking a little bit, but yeah, definitely +1 to what you're sharing in terms of cold therapy and just like stretching your comfort zone. And Aaron, it's been a lot of fun connecting with you today, and thank you for sharing some of your lessons and perspective and stories about helping people get out of their own way and kind of stretching what's possible for themselves.
I know this is not what I'm supposed to, and this is when I'm supposed to say thank you, and then we call it a day. But I feel compelled to say this one thing. Like I was just talking to a guy earlier who works with leaders around the world, and we were talking about manifesting, which is a bit of a strange word to use within that context. But I think as it relates to this conversation, his point of view is he doesn't like the word manifesting. He sees it as co-creation, and what he sees is you present an incredibly strong intention, that you have the skills, and you take an action that shows your intention, that you really mean it. And if you send mixed messages, to the universe or whatever you want to call it, and you say, I want ice cream, but then you go, you want vanilla, and I want chocolate, no strawberry, no vanilla, actually, no chocolate. That's a very kind of hard signal to send. But I think that when you have to get to this point in your career where you've burnt your boats, meaning you're not gonna do anything else. This is the thing you're doing. You're totally committed. Now that could be that in the future do something different, but in this very moment, the only thing you're going to do is what you are doing wholeheartedly. And the feeling that I would sort of present that as, going back tied to the cold exposure, is if you're standing on a dock and you're going to jump into a cold lake, you probably don't want to. Like there's a bit of a like, oh man, but the second that your feet leave the dock, that's commitment. There's no going back. You've already committed. You really don't know exactly what it's going to feel like because you haven't hit the water yet. But it's that feeling as your feet have left the ground, you've propelled yourself forward, and that's commitment. So when you're getting to these places, whether it's on the small scale, on the big scale, looking at the big vision of, this is the mountain I'm going to climb, or this is my very next task, that level of commitment where you leave everything else behind and you're in that moment, that's what it feels like to be wholeheartedly committed and give a serious intention. You don't need to know what the result's going to be, but you need to have that level of intention and that level of commitment to what you're doing, not for anyone else, but for yourself. Because if you're not doing that, if you don't believe in yourself, then why should anyone else? So anyways, I cut you off. I apologize. I just felt like I should, say that.
I'm glad you shared that. I love that. Yeah, I mean, the word that came to mind was exhilaration. Sort of that feeling of, because you're right. Like you don't really know. Like you've left the ground. There's no going back. You're all in. It's kind of scary, but also exciting. You're stretching your limits, and yeah, it's exhilarating. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing some lessons from your life. And hopefully people who are watching this right now are feeling inspired as well to kind of stretch what's possible for themselves. For anyone that's listening or watching this right now who is interested in connecting more with you or taking kind of the next step in their own journey of self-discovery, where do you recommend they go to learn more?
They could go to aaronbethune.com, which is AARONBETHUNE.com. They could go to WeWriteStories.com. They could go to PlayItLoudMusic.com. They could reach out to me personally at my email address, which is aaron@aaronbethune.com. I mentioned mentors earlier. I mean, I honestly feel that, I would not be, I would practicing what I preach. I like everyone, we have limited time, but when there's a good fit, if there's anything I can do to help someone, I'm always interested. I feel like that's something I'm able to do, and it makes me feel like I'm fulfilling my purpose. So if people want to reach out, and if I'm not able to help, I usually know the person that can.
Well, like always, put the links in the show notes for easy access. And Aaron, thank you again for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, man. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah!